And then when we didn't have a night couple, then my husband would take part of the night and work a while, and then we had a young man that would come in and work part-time. But we had a lady that had worked at the blacksmith, the old cafe, I can't think, I know what cafe that was too. Maybe you remember, Sandy.
I don't, where was it? On deck?
Where moms were.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've forgotten the name too.
Yeah, she used to work there, and then she was originally from Union, and so she came back to Union, and then she worked nights for us. So all our problems were trying to find a young man to work with her, because we had hired a couple that we thought would be just fine, and I couldn't believe it that he could not make change. We just thought that was so strange, because the customer had to count the money out for him. So we didn't keep him very long, I'll tell you, because we didn't know how the money deal was going.
Now, what did you do when Lowell went in the service?
I beg your pardon?
What did you do when Lowell went in the service?
I went to the secretary school in Omaha, because I was interested in working for the civil service if I could get a job there. And so I worked there, I went there, and of course gasoline was rationed and everything, and we really had, and tires were rationed, and so it was consolidated in many ways. And then when he got stationed, to be stationed there quite a little while, I followed him, and we went to Mississippi, because that's where he was stationed.
Mm-hmm.
And the place, of course, was not very, very large, and they had a service center there for the military. And we had to find a room, because a lot of people just stayed all night at the depot if they came in on train, because they didn't have any place to go, and we didn't either. We stayed one night, and then we found a place. And a lot of those homes in those countries, in the South especially, were big and had big verandas and things. And the house that we found a room in was one of those with a big veranda, and it was divided off on, and mind you, it just had a screen, it didn't have glass on it, but it was divided off with curtains in between, and the people next to you could see their feet, because and then they furnished you a fairly good sized cot, not a bed even. And that's what we used until we finally found a place that was a lot better. And the place that we finally ended up with was south of Grenada, probably 8 or 10 miles, and there was a bus that run back and forth every day. And so I got a room there with a lady, widow lady, and of course the men didn't get to come in every night. Maybe Wednesday night and Saturday night was just about all that you ever got to see them. But I got a job at I went to a service center one day, because they were advertising for some help. And when I got there, I rode the bus up from where we were to Grenada, and we had a major there that was interviewing the people, and I sat there, and it's people, but when I came in, there were 7 or 8 people there, and I thought, oh, I'll never get this job. But I stayed. I missed my lunch, I didn't leave. I stayed there. Everybody left until 4 o'clock, and I was the only one there. And this major said to me, "You've been here all day." And I said, "Yes, I have." And he said, "Are you interested in this job?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And so he said, "What makes you think you can do the work that they offer?" And I said, "Well, I think if you are trained by anybody and you listen, I don't see any reason why a person couldn't have that job." He said, "You're hired." So I got that job and worked for the area engineers then.
Doing what?
Pardon?
What did you do?
I was a typist.
Okay.
Mhm. And it was a big room that we were in. There were probably 8 or 10 people who were doing pretty much the same thing. We had a major in charge of us, and it was real interesting because the people from the South, I'm sorry, but they called us damn Yankees. And we had one gal there that, oh, every day she would just carry on and carry on about how we let the black people go to the movies with us and use the same toilets and eat in the same cafe and all that kind of. And I had heard it just about enough. So I turned to her one day and I said, "Don't talk about intimacy to me." I said, "What's more intimate than having these people in your kitchen cooking for you, taking care of your children, and sometimes even nursing your children?" And boy, did that shut her up. And so at the break, I said to the major, that I beg your pardon for that outburst. And he said, "Well, she needed that." He said, "I couldn't say anything to her, but he said, you got that fixed." So I did that. And I followed him. He went to Fort Jackson and got some training there. And I followed him on the train and fortunately met, I stayed all night at the YWCA, and I went out the next day and they told me there was this place that they would take another wife and husband. So I went there, and they were the most loveliest South people. They just, on the nights that I was there, that's the first time I ever ate hush puppies in my life. And they'd have a backyard fire, and then they'd have hush puppies, and it was really great. They were wonderful. He also took pictures and developed them. And when I was interested in that, he took me in his little dark room and showed me how he developed pictures and stuff. I loved those people. And while I was there, during the period of time that Mac was there, I worked at the dime store. I went down, and when they found out I had run a cafe and had money, had handled money, they hired me. You know, I had to check all the drawers in the morning and count the money at night, and all the money had to, and one night I absolutely could not account for $10 a dime. And so I stayed, and the boss come in and he said, "What's the trouble?" And I said, "I can't get this money to balance." And so he said, "Well, if you can't get it, you don't worry about it." But pretty soon when I looked at it, someone had wrapped dimes in a penny wrapper. And there was my $9.50, and I finally recognized that. And I remember one day when he come in and he wanted me to order some chair seats. Well, you know, a lot of the southern language, some of it you can understand, some of it you can't. I had an awful time under it, and he wanted me to order chair seats, and I asked him about 3 or 4 times, and then I was embarrassed, and I said, okay. Then after you went out, I thought, well, how am I gonna order something and couldn't even understand what the man said? And so, finally, I figured that out, and it was chair seats, so did that. So I really liked that job. I enjoyed the position that I had, and the people I stayed with. And then we went to South Carolina, and I got a job with the working for the military in the library that they had, where they loaned out all the films and stuff like that. And I did office work there until the girl who handled all the records and stuff and loaned them out, she left, and so they put me in that place, and I really liked that job because it wasn't hard to do, and it was interesting too. And so I stayed there and till Noel went overseas, and that was in October.
And where did he go? European or Asian?
Pardon?
Did he go to Europe or Asia?
He went to Europe.
Europe.
Mm-hmm. He was, his whole division, he belonged to the 87th Acorn Division, and they were there during the Battle of the Bulge and all those things. And it was a long time before he'd talk about some things, because things that had happened, and like one night there was a bomb dropped in where they were having their supper and killed 5 or 6 people, and he found it very difficult to talk about that because they were all friends of his, and then he'd talk about different circumstances, but when the war was over, then the Battle of the Bulge was about one of the worst things that they went through. When the war was over, their crew, their army, freed the people at Buchenwald.
Oh my.
And but he wouldn't talk about that for a long, long time. It was so pitiful. But I have some pictures today of that he was able to take, and his own picture is taken with one of the men that was there, that was just skin and bones. And another thing that was so sad about that was that they had little furnaces that when the people died and their arms were outstretched and their legs were outstretched, and the furnace was long, probably about 6 or 8 feet long, and just certain width. And so they'd saw off the arms and the legs so that they could get those bodies to fit in those ovens. And underneath that little sawmill was a big pile of bone and blood and stuff. And a lot of people wouldn't believe that, but I have the pictures, some of the pictures to prove that. So it was a pretty hard time. But when I went to Germany after the war, Buchenwald wasn't there anymore, but there was another one that was not quite as popular as Buchenwald. It's still there, I think, that they still have, and I can't think of the name of it right now.
Would it be Auschwitz?
Hmm?
Would it be Auschwitz? That
Auschwitz.
was one of them.
It could have been, it has a different name though now.
Krakow.
Dachau. That's it.
Auschwitz was in Poland.
And that was really interesting because they slept in tiered beds, and there wouldn't even be a blanket underneath them or anything, and lots of times stuff would just drip through there to the people on the underside, and they had some terrible stories to tell about